Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another BC election forecast for this October. Before I begin the rest of the video, just once again, I'd like to shout out all my channel members. You greatly help support the channel. It really makes a lot of things easier. If you want to support my channel, you should go down below and use the join button. If you can't afford that, I understand. In which case, just do your basic YouTube things like share, subscribe, and comment below. No further ado, let us begin. So as everyone can see, we now have a brand new map for BC. Comment below if anything is too hard to see or anything else. Any gripes on it? I feel like the colors should be good on this one. There are some people on the Quebec video still having critique on colors, and that is not to say that is wrong, because I want to make this map readable for you guys, so if it's hard to read, I'll change that, but there's still people giving feedback, so if you have feedback, keep giving that. Now, there's just two things I want to touch on model-wise before I continue with the rest of the video. These aren't related to the forecast, these are just, or what I'm going to talk about, these are related to the specificities of actually forecasting this. So first off, I'm not super confident with bulky Stykine up here or North Islands here. I might not be wrong on those, but I'm not confident in them. And why I'm not confident is twofold. One, it's really difficult to estimate the exact strength of the Conservatives and where they are strong. I have a rough heuristic based off of vote switchers from previous elections where the Conservatives are strong federally, stuff like that. That doesn't mean I'm right. And that also doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means there's a big unknown. The margin of error for this forecast, for the rest of the coverage of this election, is going to be like that because there is an unknown quality to this. We don't really know where the Conservatives are strongest and where they are weakest. In a lot of regards, I could be completely off kilter saying North Islands here is flipping or bulky Stykine is flipping. That could be completely crazy. That could be completely wrong. Similarly, I could be completely wrong that the areas around Kelowna and Kamloops here are staying UBC. I could be completely off base with that. I know 338 Canada is not projecting them to stay UBC, and I have nothing against his forecast. I think he's perfectly reasonable and legitimate for him to be forecasting it that way. I believe he actually has them going mostly conservative, but some are saying going at NDP. And that boils down again to the same question. Where is the BCC's vote strongest? And it's kind of an unknown. We don't really know. We have some polls, yes. We have some vote switching, yes. But without proper historical data, it's a lot harder. And the second factor I want to really stress on here, and I really want to hit on, I don't have great demographic data for this one. Unlike Manitoba or Alberta or Ontario or Quebec, BC doesn't really publish official demographic breakdowns of each riding. There is public available census data and stuff, and I could probably create metrics for all the ridings, but that's a lot more effort. And I'm not saying I wouldn't do the effort, I literally don't have the time to do it. If I was doing this full time, I would, and I wouldn't be talking about this right now. But I don't do this full time, and I don't have the time to break down for the province and calculate myself using census data what the numbers are. And even if I did that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right, because maybe they have it broken down by precinct in the census data, but that's not necessarily guaranteed. I haven't looked at it in great detail. So it's possible, and I probably could do it. I just don't have time to do it. So we have a very rough heuristic on a lot of these things, and a lot of them we don't really have anything. So that's going to make the margin of error in my model higher than in Alberta, higher than Manitoba, higher than Ontario, or whatever. Even though my model, I improve on it every single election, I update it and make it better, this one is going to be kind of a step back in regards to margin of error. Just because of the natures, I don't have the same amount of data. Now, that's not to say the result is in contention. The NDP are clearly and firmly in first place. The only contention here is how strong is the UBC and how strong is the Conservative vote, and where is it strong. But with that, let us actually start touching on some of the data. So we have here for vote distribution, and why, one of the reasons why in the north here, I have it basically a clean sweep for the BCC, is the polling data and my modeling and all that suggests they're going to be getting a 20-point margin in northern BC. And in southern BC, it's showing like a really tight three-way race, which is why the UBC is holding some ridings, why the NDP is holding some, why the Conservatives are winning some. It's a tight three-way race there. And then you look at, say, Metro Vancouver, and we have a 32-point lead for the BC NDP. And that gives you something like this. Just 2 BCU seats. Richmond is kind of close. Delta's kind of close, or Delta South, I should say. West Vancouver is, I can't think of the rest of the name of the riding. What is the rest of the name? Sea to Sky? No, that's the wrong country, or wrong riding. Sorry. West Vancouver Capilano? Yeah, Capilano is close. Actually, 338 has that one going UBC, and I don't. And it's just a matter of he and I have different numbers on where BCU is strongest. And that's because it likely boils down to where we have the BCC being the strongest. I have the BCC being substantially weaker in Vancouver than the rest of the province by nearly 4 points. I don't know offhand if... Actually, let's see. Metro Vancouver. Let's see if he breaks it down here. He doesn't. He only has a 2-point difference. And he actually has the NDP weaker in Metro Vancouver too, probably as a result of that. But the point is, there's some differences in projections. And a lot of that is due to just different assumptions because there's so many unknowns to the BCC. It's basically brand new in this configuration. But that's enough finicky little math details for now. Let us actually go on to the nuts and bolts of this. So what is happening? Why is this happening? Well, what we're really seeing right now, and if you kind of look at this trend line since October, the BCU has lost nearly 3 points, three and a half, and the Conservatives have gained 6. The BC NDP is roughly flat, and the Greens are slightly falling, and others decreasing, but others kind of just a wild card. So what does this really mean? Why is this happening? Well, Kevin Falcon is basically just completely fumbling the football at this point. Nothing he has done this calendar year, 2024, has worked. He has oodles of incumbent, long-term, popular MLAs retiring. He's just fumbling his messaging. He can't quite decide if he wants to lean into Poilievre. Sometimes he actually has photo ops, goes to rallies, goes to events with Poilievre. But sometimes he pulls away from Poilievre and tries to be more centrist, more blue liberal-like, such as opposing Smith's gender bill? I don't know what else do you call it. Parental rights bill? Whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want it to be called. Smith's new bill. I would call it by the bill name, but I would call it, or the bill number. I don't remember what it is, though. he opposes that. But Polyev supports that. So, is he like Polyev? Is he like a liberal? He can't even decide himself. He doesn't know what he wants to portray himself as. So then you end up getting voters being confused. They don't know who Falcon is. Is Falcon a conservative like Polyev? Is he a conservative like Rustad? Or is he more of a liberal? Is he kind of like a Bill Morneau? Is he closer to Christy Clark? No one knows. Because he doesn't know. And he keeps showing this again and again. He keeps waffling positions. His recent housing proposal is bizarre. It's not necessarily bad, but it's also not necessarily good. It's just strange. And that's where Falcon's position is. He doesn't know what he wants to be. And that's arguably one of the reasons why the BCU is utterly collapsing. And likely why the Conservatives are gaining. In the past, in the last fall, since when the Conservatives really started gaining ground, there was a lot of discussion that, well, they're only gaining so much ground because voters are confused because the BCU changed their name. That's so silly. That's the silliest thing ever. I'm sure there are voters who are confused. Absolutely. But that's not why the Conservatives are gaining so much ground right now. Maybe, at best, it opened the door for them to gaining a lot of ground, but the reason why they're gaining so much ground and becoming a real threat, a real factor, is, well, boils down to Falcon fired and booted Rustad out of the caucus for having a fairly generic view on climate. A right-leaning view on climate. I believe I don't recall the exact thing Rustad said, but I think it was along the lines of, it's not a serious crisis or something like that. But a fairly typical right-wing view. A lot of right-wingers believe that. And if you are ostensibly the right-wing party, kicking someone out over that is a big risk. You have a really big risk of alienating your base. As we saw so robustly recently, in the last 2 years, 3 years really, federally, a party can't run from its base. It shouldn't run from its base. That doesn't mean it should embrace every single thing the base wants, but it also means it can't hold the base in contempt. It has to respect the base where it is and treat it where it is. And that's the tricky and the folly a lot of right-wing parties can have. Because unlike the left, unlike people like, or something like the NDP, the leader themselves of the NDP is less important. I'm not saying Ebby or before Horgan was irrelevant. Their particular merits and character matters, but it's not as important. It's a lot easier to get the left to support a leader that they don't fully agree with, because the left is a much more, as a ideologically speaking, is much more willing and open to participate in what I call consensus government. And what I mean by consensus government is effectively there is a table where people talk to each other and have their ideas heard. Kind of picture upper middle management at a company, that kind of thing. A bunch of different people spitballing ideas together at a table. That lends itself much closer to how the left works. You look at rallies or conventions of left-wing parties, and they function very similar to that. They're very, very, very similar to that. And there's all sorts of reasons why we could get into that, but they're kind of out of scope of this video. I might, if you really want to, I might put that onto the to-do list for understanding politics. Like the more in-depth reason why this difference exists. But for now, just accept. You can ask me questions in the comments about it, but just we're going to go with it as that's just a thing. I don't have time to really get into it. That model doesn't really work for the right. And you can tell it doesn't work for the right because right-wing parties everywhere behave differently than left-wing parties. Like, they obviously and clearly behave differently. The US is the most obvious and clear example of this. You look at how Biden's government functioned versus how Trump's government functioned. The particular, or Obama before Biden and Bush before Trump. The particular character qualities of Obama or Biden matter less to the left because the leadership model that the Democrats in the US embody is a much more consensus-orientated organization. It's a lot easier for dissidents or disaffected people to sit at the table and air their grievances and at least feel heard. That's not how the left or the right really works, though. No right-wing party really has this behavior. In the times that they've tried to do this, such as O'Toole in 2021, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work, you might ask? Well, the right is more individualistic. In a certain sense. The best way to phrase this is right-wingers are individualistic in... How do I want to phrase this? They're individualistic in action, but they're collectivist in spirit. That sounds really weird, but it basically boils down to the right believes in protecting and preserving the community, but the individual qualities and actions of a person are what matters, whereas the left usually, this is usually the dividing line between left and right, the left usually believes that the collective responsibility of the community and the collective actions of the community. There is no individual actions involved. That's the main difference. Everyone believes in community unless you are a fringe anarchist type. Even most anarchists actually believe in community. That's why they're anarchist communes, not anarchist farm. But anyways. So the individual actions of the leader matter much more in the right. And part of that, and one of the reasons for that, is the right structurally looks fractal, whereas the left is, this is part of another core difference between right and left, just hierarchy versus egalitarianism. The left is much more egalitarian, which is one of the reasons why they're also more likely to have consensus for willing to participate in consensus leadership. Because individual left-wingers, the laity of the left sees themselves more as equals to their leaders than the right does. That's just, again, an emergent trait of how these factions work out, how these ideologies mesh in society. It's just what it is. So, as a consequence, the right as a society, as a country, as a faction in a political system, looks fractal. At the service level, you have the leader, his lieutenants, and then the laity. But inside that, each lieutenant is the leader of their own sub-faction who has their own laity. And then you can keep spoiling that and breaking that down more and more and more and more and more and more. To the point that eventually you get down to the lowest laity, and that's their own little faction. At that level, it's basically an irrelevant faction, but the individual right-winger, regardless of whether there's merit to this, considers themselves their own tiny little faction. They might join a bigger faction. They might have, in a sense, fealty to a larger faction. And that larger faction might have fealty to yet a larger faction, and so on and so forth. But they conceive of things this way. Just look at, again, the Republicans in the US is really clear. You look at their caucus in the House. You have several different caucuses, but one, quite notably, the House Freedom Caucus. That is very overtly led by Matt Gaetz. And Matt Gaetz uses that. He is the leader of the faction, the figurehead of the faction. And he advocates on behalf of the rest of the faction. Makes deals on behalf of the rest of the faction. Yes, they have input. They talk to him. They're not mild drones. They all have their own individual autonomy and action. Some will leave this faction and join others. But that is how it works. They will usually vote that sub-faction acts as a bloc. You look in the Conservative Party of Canada as a whole, you have several different sub-factions in it. There's too many to list here. Or just some of the highlights. We have the SOCONs. Now, there's not a formal leader to the SOCONs, but usually people say someone like Garnet Genus, I don't know, is the leader of the SOCONs, or at least the spiritual leader of the SOCONs. Whether it's true or not, you could ask him, or you could ask other SOCONs in the actual caucus, but that's the idea. He's usually the guy given. Michael Chong might be usually given as the more foreign policy hawks of the party. Then you might have, prior to his leadership run, he probably might have been more the liberal, conservative, freedom, our version of like the Freedom Caucus-y kind of part of the Conservative Party. And there's more and more. At one point, Aaron O'Toole was like the Red Tory leader, though modern Red Tories have no relation to old-fashioned Red Tories, which is kind of funny, but anyways. And why does this matter? Well, there's a really big risk when you evict one of these leaders, one of these people, that you could destroy your own party. Because it's not just the case that this sub-faction leader in the right is just one of someone on the table. No, they're controlling an entire sub-faction. They're the leader of a sub-faction. They are a mini-party leader. That's why if you look federally, one of the first things Pierre Poilievre did when he became the leader of the Conservative Party is he appointed several people ideologically similar to Aaron O'Toole to his cabinet, his shadow cabinet. Now, these people backed him for leadership. They endorsed him. But he needed to put them there because he needed to effectively take someone who was already given him fealty and make them the leader of that faction. It seems to have worked, for the record. But he needed to do that because the previous leader of that faction, Aaron O'Toole, is gone. He's no longer in politics. So there had to be a new leader in the caucus. Now, I don't know all the specifics and all the details of the UBC, or previously the BC Liberal Party, but what we seem to have happened is by firing Rustad and kicking him out of the party, Rustad, either because he was actually the leader of, let's say, the more hardline conservatives in the BC United, or perhaps he was just a lieutenant to that person. I don't know. Don't know all the caucus dynamics. But what clearly happened is he kicked out Falcon, someone who is too high of a rank in the conservative hierarchy, and then Rustad could just walk away with his entire faction and make a new party. Well, in this case, take an existing party and make it relevant. And again, this is why Rustad seems to have went from 0 to massive in just a year and a bit. Whereas you look at federally, someone like Derek Sloan, kicked out of the Conservative Party of Canada by Erin O'Toole, he did a few things, but not really. Maxime Bernier walked away from the Conservative Party, tried to make his own faction, the PPC. And it did a few things. It's rocked a little bit of ways, but it's not really gone anywhere yet. The BCC is about to go somewhere really, really, really fast. One election to seats, effectively. And that boils down to not the name change. Not that Falcon fired someone from the party. That happens all the time. People kick out people from caucus literally every single parliament and basically every single parliamentary system ever. That always happens. The problem here is twofold. Why this became a really bad situation for the BCU is twofold. The first is Rustad was too significant of a political figure, and he commanded his own internal faction, at least to some level, and that was easily transferred into a new party. The second factor is Falcon, because he dithers too much. He is not convincing. He is not confident. He has not the conviction of action necessary, does not command the loyalty of the right in BC. You compare this to Harper. Harper managed to get the Social Conservatives federally to back him for 9 years, 2006 to 2015. Actually, you could even say they probably voted for him in 2015, so 10 years, let's say. He didn't really do anything for them. Didn't do anything on abortion, didn't do anything on gay marriage, didn't do anything on... Well, he did some things on crime. Drugs wasn't really a problem at the time. Didn't really do anything about family or fertility. Like, there's all sorts of things he didn't really do anything about. He didn't really do anything for them. But they all backed him. And there wasn't this concern. And I'm sure if you look back at the records, he probably booted out people associated closely with the SOCON faction from the caucus, because they probably were doing something dumb. But they didn't turn into a real threat. Why? Well, Harper had the respect of the people of the SOCON faction. They respected him as a person. Whether they agreed with him on all his policies is immaterial. They respected him as a person and as a leader. And that's the really important thing with the right. Because it is an individual-focused model of leadership, focused very much on respect and essentially giving fealty to somebody, which can be withdrawn at a whim, the leader has to be respected by people, by their voters. And as long as the leader has the respect of the voters, they will be doing at least okay. They lose that respect, like Falcon has, by just not making any firm decisions, not, in a sense, not giving them any red meat. Too little meat starves the base. It loses their trust and loses their confidence, and then once given a reason to doubt, or let's put it a better way, ice cubes don't form, well, if it's perfectly clean water. Usually. I'm not full science guy here, but anyways, they usually don't form very well perfectly clean water. There needs to be something there. Be it a speck of dirt, be it an ice cube tray. Now the crystal can start forming on, and then grows from there. That's kind of the same thing here. A revolt joining into a new party can't form without some spec to cling to. And that spec has to be someone who commands more loyalty and more respect from a significant subfaction of the province, or let's say the polity here, than the last leader had. And every moment after that the leader dithers, the new breakaway faction will get stronger. Which is why I think, I can't guarantee this, but I think it's very likely we could see the BCU finish sub 10% in October. I think it's very plausible we could get the BCC above 30%. It might even go higher than that. And the reason for that is Falcon can't decide who he is, but Rustad knows who he is. Is Rustad the best leader possible? No, probably not. Does that matter? No, not at all. The quality of the leader, in that their ability to orate, their charisma, whatever, for the right matters less than their ability to command respect, command loyalty. Now, their ability to orate and be charismatic might matter to defeat the left in an election, to actually defeat David Eby, but to defeat a rival right wing, such as BCU, not necessary. Rustad doesn't need to be the best candidate in the world to beat Falcon. He just needs to be better than Falcon. And Falcon is so far, in his tenure as leader of BCU, a terrible leader in every possible metric. There's nothing you could even remotely say positive about him. His party's done objectively terrible. Just from 2020 alone. He wasn't leader in 2020, sure, but he's down 13 percentage points. 13! And this is a time when incumbents in basically every other polity in the world, every other democracy, are doing horrific. Legault is getting destroyed. Ford actually has a serious challenge to the 1,000-year Ford Imperium. We could go on. Biden might lose the next 24 election. The UK Tories are about to lose. Australia Labour is taking a hit. New Zealand Labour just lost. There's more and more. The incumbent parties everywhere are getting beat up except BC. In BC, the party getting utterly destroyed is the main opposition. And it's getting utterly destroyed because Kevin Falcon is a terrible leader. But with that, I bid you adieu. Let me know if you like this more really technical video, but who knows? You might like this. I don't know.